Good morning and welcome to part 2 of this Blender tutorial about rigging a character with Rigify, which at this point we've essentially finished roughly rigging the character, and also using the nonlinear animation editor, the NLA, in Blender and creating a walk cycle. So to start right off, we're going to create a walk cycle with this character here. We have to have something put together before we can get into the NLA editor. And I've got my screencast keys turned on, so down here you should be able to see what buttons I'm using on the keyboard, on the mouse. And I'll try to explain kind of what I'm doing as I go. So if you remember from last time, and I should mention something really quick. One thing I forgot to mention in the last tutorial, I put it in the description of the video since I forgot to do it, and YouTube isn't letting you do annotations anymore. But with the mesh, if you select the mesh here, you'll notice right now my location is at 0, 0, 0 in XYZ. There's no rotation. There's also no scaling. That's because all of those have been applied. I applied the scale, the rotation, and the location with Control A. You can apply them right here. And I also did that to the armature, the original armature, before I ever parented anything, before I generated the rig. You want all of those things to have their scale, location, and rotation applied. I know it's probably frustrating that I'm saying that in part 2 when it should have happened in part 1. Hopefully everybody will notice that note in the video description. I apologize for forgetting about that. To launch right in here though, first of all, I'm going to put my character in a standing position. So going into wireframe view, that will allow me to select both IK solvers for the feet here. I might as well move those at the same time. We'll set them down on the ground, and there's still just a little bit of a bend in the knee, which is perfect. That's what we want. So a walk cycle consists of just a few basic positions that we're going to keyframe. And also the timing of a walk cycle is important. I mean, realistically, a person can only walk so slow or so fast. You want that to happen at a realistic pace. And I found that for a couple of strides, a quick left-right stride, which is all you really need to start a walk cycle, a little over a second is usually a pretty decent pace. Now, if I go into my render settings over here, you can see that my frame rate here is set to 24 frames per second. So just for the sake of making the math reasonably easy, I'm going to make this a 30-second walk cycle. So I'm going to click on my little timeline marker here and put it on frame 30, and then tap E, and that shortens my overall timeline, sets my end frame basically to frame 30. Or I could just type it in over here, or type it in, right down here. But this is going to be we're just going to deal with these 30 frames here. And you'll see why that's handy when we start playing it through to see how it looks. So the first, I'm going to start off with the left foot forward. So I'm going to select just the IK solver for the left foot here. And again, I'm modeling, or rather here I'm posing this model from named orthographic viewports so that I don't accidentally move in an axis that I don't intend. I just want to move in the Y-axis for now. So I'm going to grab this foot and move it forward into a good contact position. And you can see that it's kind of stretching a little bit, and that's fairly natural. I like to do kind of long strides. That's how I walk in real life, so maybe that's why I do walk cycles that way. Then I'm going to grab the right foot and put it back a little ways so that it's going to be back here just leaving the ground. And obviously neither of these are terribly realistic. This is not how somebody looks when they're walking. The legs are too straight. This calf has been stretched, which can't happen in real life without serious injury. So now I'm going to grab the torso and just bring it down just a touch. There we go. And that looks a little more natural. We're not quite there yet. Because of the relaxed position that we modeled this model in, the posterior kind of sticks out. We've got a little too much curvature in the spine here. So I can rotate that a little bit, or I can grab this, I'm not sure what bone this is. Oh, the hips. I can grab this hip bone here, and I can rotate that forward just a little bit. Then bring the whole torso back just a little bit. There we go. Okay, and now obviously keeping your feet flat on the ground like this isn't a very realistic proposition either, so I'm going to grab this heel IK here, and I'm going to tip this foot up just a little bit, and that means that I need to bring the heel up just a little so to where it actually contacts the ground. Then I'm going to tip this forward just a little. And that's looking a little better. This character's still leaning back pretty extremely considering how they're supposed to be walking. So I'm going to try, let's maybe lean forward the shoulders just a little bit. Try tipping the hips just a little. There we go. And that's probably a little more realistic. Okay. Now, walking like a zombie here because the hands are still in kind of a funky position. So at this point, I need to remember which bones I've manipulated. I've manipulated the torso. I've manipulated the hips. I've manipulated this. I think this is the shoulders here. Let's double check. The chest. Sorry, chest bone. And I've manipulated both foot IKs and both heel IKs. And the reason I need to remember those is I'm going to need to keyframe them because otherwise they can just be moved back to their default position and make my walk cycle look really funny. But I'm reasonably happy with how the feet are looking and the legs right now. I think that's probably pretty good. I'm sure from a front view they're probably a little bit messed up, so let's look. Yeah, this person's waddling. So let's move these in the x-axis now. GX. And that's a little better. People tend to cross their feet over in front of each other just a little bit when they're walking. Okay. So that's a little more realistic as far as a good looking stride in the legs goes, and I'm not going to worry about the hands so much yet. I can come to them a little later, but I'm going to move my timeline marker to frame 1, and I'm going to set location and rotation to be my key set, my keying set, because those are the two types of transformations I've done to these IK solvers so far. I've rotated and moved the feet, the heels, the torso, the hips, and the chest. So with all of those selected, it's time to keyframe. I'm just going to tap I on the keyboard, and I've now keyframed all of those values. Now, this is going to be a 30-frame walk cycle. And the walk cycle ends exactly as it begins. So to save myself some reposing later, I can just drag my timeline marker all the way over to frame 30. Then I can tap I. Again, now you can see on my timeline I have two keyframes, one at frame 1, well, a set of keyframes at frame 1 and a set of keyframes at frame 30. They're identical. There is really no motion taking place here. So the next thing I need to do is that basically this is the beginning pose and the ending pose of the walk cycle. Right in the middle, the pose should be exactly the opposite of this pose, right? The right foot should be forward and the left foot should be back. So fortunately, Blender makes it really easy to accomplish that. So I'm going to go to my pose menu. And you see I've got this little thing called copy pose. Control C is the shortcut. And I can then paste the pose, or I can paste an X flipped pose. And that's really, really handy because this is the X axis from left to right. And what I can do is I can take all of these bones that I've copied a pose for, and I can paste them flipped across the X axis. So this is what that looks like. If I hit Control C, that copies my pose, and then Control Shift V pastes it X flipped. Now that doesn't do anything for me in the long run until I keyframe it. So again, don't forget to keyframe, tap I. And now there's actually kind of a funky little sort of moonwalky animation going on here. You can see that basically my character is cross-country skiing. So we've got a start. Now, basically, that looks funny. It looks like it's sliding. I mean, it is sliding an awful lot because all we've really posed here are the contact positions for the walk cycle. We haven't posed any passing positions, which we need to get to those now. And between frame 1 and frame 15, of course, 15 is an odd number, so we can't divide that perfectly evenly. So I'm going to go to frame 8. I started with my left foot forward, so it needs to keep contact with the ground as it moves back. It's the traction foot. But the right foot is moving forward at this point and should be elevated just a little and passing the left foot as it comes forward to get it to make contact. So I'm going to move it up. Most people when they walk don't lift their feet too high. And I'm going to point that down just a little bit. And this will look a little bit funny, like it looks kind of like she's creeping up on somebody right now, sneaking up on somebody. So I'm going to keyframe that, and then I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to Control C to copy my pose, grab the other bone, and Control Shift V. Whoop. Haha. I need to follow my own advice here, don't I? I need to remember to keyframe. Oh, it is keyframed. Okay, so now I'm going to go to frame 23 and Control Shift V to paste an X flipped pose. We get the other side of the passing pose. So tap I to keyframe that. Now if we watch our walk cycle, it's not skiing so much. It's still not really there, but it's looking a little better each time. Okay, so we're making contact. This is really, really smooth. There's no weight distribution or anything going on here, but from here we can animate things a little bit better. So one other thing people do as they walk, during the passing pose, their legs straighten out just a little. And that's part of the reason, not just the hand pose, but part of the reason she looks like she's sneaking up on somebody is that she's still crouched down like this. So during passing, she should be up just a little, not an awful lot. You kind of want to avoid extremes here, but I'm going to, you know what? I'm going to back up just a little because I want a little twist in the torso here before we do our passing pose. And I'll explain why in just a minute. But so with the left leg forward, I'm going to rotate this torso around just a little, and I'm going to do it on its local Z axis. So tap R, ZZ, tap Z twice, and just rotate that just a little, because your torso does rotate a little bit as you, let's see, that might be too extreme. R, ZZ, rotate that just a little. There we go. Okay, and then I'm going to recreate that keyframe there on frame 1. And then I'm going to copy my pose, Control C, go to frame 30, Control V, tap I to keyframe, and go to frame 15, Control Shift V, and tap I to keyframe. Okay, and the reason I decided to do that before I keyframe the up and down motion on the passing pose is because there will be just a little bit of twist in this on the passing pose now, and I don't want to have to come in and actually like figure out about how much twist there should be between the twist here and the twist here. So by keyframing it on either side first, you can see that Blender basically shows me where it should be to be exactly between those 2 points. So that just saves me a little bit of effort later. Okay, so now we can keyframe the up and down motion. So on frame 8, I'm going to tap I to keyframe that. Then copy my pose, go to frame 23, paste X flipped, and keyframe again. Now you can see that that's already looking better than it was before. It's probably time to start dealing with the hands just a little bit so that we can kind of figure that out. Now, most people, when they walk, they swing their hands a little bit. And usually, if the left foot is forward, the left hand is back. So I'm going to use my IK solvers here for the hands to just kind of swing this around. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to keyframe that. And then skip forward to frame 30 and keyframe the same thing because frame 1 and frame 30 should be identical. Then I'm going to copy my pose, Control C. Go to frame 15. Oh, I didn't need to copy my pose yet, sorry. So frame 15, this should be posed forward, and quite often people will kind of twist their hand forward just a little bit. And that might be a little too extreme. Let's try that. So I'm going to keyframe that. And at this point, since I already did copy my pose, I can go to the right hand and Control Shift V to paste X flipped, since it should be back right now. Keyframe that. Now I can copy my left hand pose, Control C, and that, of course, from frame 15, the left hand should be an X flipped pose compared to frame 1 and frame 30 for the right hand. So I'll go to frame 30, Control Shift V, and keyframe that. Go to frame 1 and do the same thing. Control Shift V, keyframe it again. Now let's see how that looks if we play that. Okay. And that's looking all right. So we're starting to get there with a walk cycle. There's a couple things we can do to improve this walk cycle. A couple things that'll give it a little better sense of weight. For one thing, watch the toes here. The heel contacts the ground, and if we move forward one frame, that heel, we just kind of keep our weight on that heel, and it almost hovers forward onto the ball of the foot, which is very unnatural. That's, of course, physically impossible, essentially. This thing's got a real glide step going, and it's not working for us visually. So what I like to do is I just like to grab this little heel IK solver, move forward a couple of frames, and within that couple of frames, I like to slap the foot down. So let's grab that in the Z-axis. Almost like the person's wearing flip-flops or something, and then keyframe both of those. Let's see what that looks like. There's a little more weight to that. So let's copy that pose, Control C, and coming forward to frame 17 now, we will paste X flipped, Control Shift V, and we will keyframe that pose. So now the weight looks like it's resting much more realistically on the feet. Okay, the one problem I'm kind of having here, though, is if we watch, the weight kind of goes forward on the ball of the foot for the rest of the stride, and that's also not very realistic. So let's try to fix that just a little, if we can. So I'm going to say maybe about, well, let's just try keeping it on frame 8. Let's set our heel back down until about frame 8, and then as the foot comes under the center of gravity of the body, then we'll allow the heel to start coming up. So I'm going to keyframe that heel as down right there on frame 8, and then we'll copy that pose, grab the other heel and go to frame 23 and paste X flipped, Control Shift V, keyframe that. Let's see what that looks like. That is better, isn't it? It's a little more realistic. Okay, the other thing that I like to do to give a little bit of a sense of weight is I like to distribute the weight through the hips. So I did a little bit of slow motion filming a while back, just kind of people walking. I noticed that when the heel impacts the ground and weight shifts to a heel, that the shift of that weight, the burden of it basically kind of ripples up almost through the leg that's taking it and into the hip, and it's the hip that largely absorbs that. So from right here, after this heel impacts the ground, which it does right on frame 1 here, this hip on the left foot here, on the left side, this hip should pop up just a little bit immediately after that happens. So we've already got this hip keyframed right here. And so I'm going to come in just, again, about 2 frames, and I'm going to pop that up just a little. You don't want to do this too much, or else you'll get this kind of sassy, like seductive, like pseudo weird walk kind of thing going on. So I'm going to pop that up just a little right there. Tap I to keyframe, and then I'm going to copy my pose. And of course, on this side, frame 17, we need to paste X flipped, Control Shift V, and tap I again. Let's see how that plays. Okay, and that's a little better. That makes it look a little bit more like the person has a little bit of weight to them. The other thing I like to do is I like to grab this chest muscle, or chest bone, sorry, and rotate it just a little bit opposite the hips. So when the left foot is forward, the hips rotate the left side forward just a little bit. So I'm going to rotate the shoulders, the chest here, so that the right or the left shoulder goes back just a touch. So again, we'll rotate in the local Z axis here. So R, Z, Z, and just a slight rotation there. Keyframe it and copy it. Control C. So come to our other frame 30 and paste it, and keyframe. Come to frame 15 and paste X flipped, Control Shift V, and keyframe. And that'll kind of bring the whole body a little more into the walk. Okay, so that's actually not a bad little walk cycle. You can spend a long time tweaking on these things. Oh, and you know what? There's one more thing I'm going to do here. Actually, 2 more things. So it looks to me like maybe there might be just a little bit of interpenetration on the mesh here. Maybe not. Maybe we're okay. Yep, just a touch. So the calf is actually going inside the other calf, and the knees are just a little bit close together. And I'm going to say we can fix that pretty easily. So during the passing pose, let's grab this foot IK solver here. During the passing pose, if we come up here, we can either move this out just a little so that the foot kind of starts back and then swings out as it comes forward and then swings back forward. Or we can actually rotate these. That's what these little, these are basically the IK pull target widget controls. So they control what the knee is aiming for as it, or as they, as the walk happens here. So if I want, I can keyframe these things. Let me show you the passing pose again. And I can rotate this out just a little. So I'm going to keyframe it. I like the position of the knees in the current walk. So I'm going to keyframe those so that I can keep those. And then during the passing, I'm going to keyframe the impact frames. So 1, 15, and 30. And then the passing frames, which are 8 and 23, I'm going to rotate those out just a little bit so we don't have the knees knocking together essentially. So I'll select both of these, keyframe them on 1, on 30, and on 15. And then at frame 8, I'm just going to grab this right one, rotate that out just a touch, and keyframe. And then I'm going to copy my pose, select the other solver, and go to frame 23 and paste an X shift pose and keyframe it. Now you can see that there's just a little bit of self-avoidance going on in the legs, which is kind of nice. It gives it a little bit more of kind of a natural feel. Okay, the other thing I'm going to do with my walk cycle, and this will require a little bit of explanation, but one thing you see a lot of in walk cycles is you see a lot of, some people call it skating, some people just call it sliding, but where a walk cycle doesn't really line up with it, the foot slides across the ground. It doesn't stay planted, the traction foot. In order to avoid that, there are a couple of things that you can kind of do up front that will help. For one thing, Blender's default interpolation mode between keyframes, or in other words, kind of how it moves from one frame to another. If I just create a cube here, and I decide to animate its position, so let's put it locrot. We'll just put it there on frame 1 and move it up. Sorry, I'm duplicating. And then on frame 30, we'll just move it over here. You can see that when I play that animation, it kind of eases in and eases out, right? It doesn't start at full speed. It speeds up a little and then it slows down toward the end. Speeds up at the from the beginning and slows down toward the end. And that's problematic for a walk cycle because our feet are doing that as well. They're easing in and easing out. So there's a couple of things we can do here. I'm going to open the dope sheet, which if I just go up to my workspaces here and change from default to animation, then this is my dope sheet. And if I ever need to delete keyframes or move them around, I can do it within this space here. So if I want to change that interpolation mode for the feet, it's pretty easy to do up here. So I can grab all of the frames for foot IKL and foot IKR, which at this point there's only a few frames for each of them. And I can go to the key menu here and click on interpolation mode, and by default I think it's set to Bezier, and I can just change that to linear, and those will no longer do that ease in and ease out thing, and that makes it easier later on for me to keep the feet planted on the ground if I use this walk cycle to actually move the model through a scene. The other thing that I need to do here, or can do to make life easier for myself, I have for each foot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 keyframes, or sets of keyframes. And if you twirl down, you can see that since my key set was set to locrot, location rotation, I have an X location, a Y, a Z, and also 4 keyframes for the rotation information here. And because I moved the foot around for these keyframes that are not the contact position, for instance, here's these keyframes here. These are where the I had the toe, or the toes kind of flop down from just a heel contact, and that has a Y location as well. It doesn't really need it. It doesn't need that information at all. So I've also got the passing, the Y location for the passing pose, which isn't really needed there either. Mostly what I need there is the Z, and probably the X to keep the heels from or the ankles from knocking together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the Y location keyframes on everything that is not an impact frame or contact frame. So basically frame 1, frame 15, and frame 30, I'm going to keep the Y location for my foot IK solvers. Other than that, I'm going to delete the Y location keyframes so that it transitions smoothly between them. I hope that makes sense. So I'll just delete these keyframes, and you won't really visually see much difference in what happens here. But basically, the transition from one side of the stride to the other will be perfectly even now because it only has keyframes for the contact positions. So I need to do the same thing on the foot ik.r. So here's my Y location. So there's my passing frame and there's my toe flop down frame. Delete those keyframes just for the Y location. So we'll just leave a gap there. And if you look down here, you can see that it essentially has had almost no effect. What it will do is that will make it easier for me to have this model grounded and not skate and slide later on. Okay, so there's the creation of our walk cycle. And in our next tutorial, we'll talk about how to integrate that with other actions into the NLA editor. Thanks for watching.